Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday DFS version. I am Scott Jenstad, back with you after a week off. I apologize for missing a week last week. Back with Ryan Belongia, as always, on Fridays. We appreciate if you guys could rate and review the podcast. Helps us out a lot. Helps people find the podcast, etc. We are sponsored by WynnBET. Obviously, appreciate them for being a partner on the podcast all year long. Ryan, first of all, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all that stuff. How is everything with you?
Oh, yeah, everything's good. Moved back to London, so we got a change of scenery.
Nice, a little bit, yeah.
So, yeah, last week, Bengals stacks won everything. Looking back, it's pretty obvious. Joe Burrow under 6K for maybe the first time all season against the Ravens, who had, were banged up in the secondary and had sort of been getting shredded by the pass, and almost no one was on Burrow. Him and T. Higgins were not very popular. Neither was Chase. You could have stacked that game almost any way. Mark Andrews continued to crush. But yeah, hopefully we'll find a spot like that this week and try to win a tournament.
Yeah, it was wild. I played very light last week just because I didn't do the podcast and I was just kind of busy with holiday stuff. I played one team, did pretty well, didn't have Burrow. I don't know if I had really dug into it, if I would have gotten there. I played Josh Allen, which worked pretty darn well too. But yeah, Burrow was obviously. Anytime you go, what was that, 525 and 4? Like there's like 10 games ever in the NFL with over 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. So like a historic level game. So every time I looked up, T. Higgins was catching another 20-yarder. So it was a wild game. We have a huge slate this week. The NFL sprung no Saturday games, no Thursday games on us. So we have a huge slate this week. We have 14 games on this. We were working mid-season. We had some buys and Thursday games. We had like 10, 11 games. This is a 14-game slate. It's huge. 9 early, 5 late. Before we get into it, I'm just kind of curious, how do you kind of deal with something like this with this big a slate? How does that affect how you kind of prep, how you build your teams?
I think in general, I'm less concerned about popularity or rostership percentage. With 14 games, you're probably going to be unique. Yeah, a few guys will still be very popular, but less so than on most weeks. So I don't think you need to do anything crazy to get leverage. You can kind of play whichever you think is the best chalk, and one or two guys that are going to be, everyone's going to be a little bit less popular than usual because we have 3 or 4 more extra games. So it's kind of just, play the best plays even more so, and not so worried about who's going to be popular or do I have too chalky of a lineup.
Yeah, that was pretty much my answer on it. It's like, as you spread out, you've got 28 quarterbacks to pick from. You just have so much stuff. And, all those top running backs are all playing and they're all on the slate. It's like, we get weeks where, last week we always had the cheap running backs were pretty easy and obvious, but there's a lot of big names when you don't have teams on bye, you don't have teams there, all that kind of stuff. And I also cross off games a little bit more than I would in a 10-game slate. Like there's a couple of games here. We have a 37, a 37 and a half, a 39 and a half, over under totals. And, I've got maybe a play or two here and there in some of those games, but for the most part, I kind of flew through those games as I was researching for this. And, if you have so many choices, I tend to kind of be a little more likely to just kind of get rid of some games. So I did that a little bit too, but we do have a Sunday night game that won't be on the slate. That's Minnesota Green Bay, kind of a fun game there. And then Cleveland at Pittsburgh, less fun from a fantasy perspective there on Monday night. So we won't be talking about those, but it's another interesting week in terms of totals. We have 2 games that are over 50 on the slate. We've got Arizona and Dallas 51.5. KC and Cincy is 51. And then those are the only 2 games, not only over 50, but over 47. There are just not a lot of high games. A little bit later, we're going to talk about which games you and I think, aside from those 2 are good ones to stack, kind of games where attacking, we think might go over the total, might get a little more back and forth than that one. But there's 9 games under 45 this week. You're going to have to pick and choose and find some games that you think are going to go over the Vegas total. You're going to have to pick some plays from those games. On the super low side, we got Detroit and Seattle's 42.5, Jacksonville, New England's 41.5, Miami, Tennessee, the Giants at Chicago and Carolina, New Orleans all under 40. So we've got a lot of low games on here. It's an interesting slate where we should see a lot of people kind of stack those two big games.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with what you said about crossing games off on bigger slates. I like that idea. I'll cross a few of these games off. And I think, like you mentioned, those two games over 50 will be popular. So if you stack them, you might need one or two pieces of leverage to try to get a bit different. Yeah, we've seen a lot of low totals on these slates recently, and a lot of these games just don't look great. So a lot of people will go to Dallas, Arizona. There's some good salaries in that game. And then people will also go to KC.
I think KC State's the big one, especially coming off last week with Cincinnati's explosion. I think that game, I think everybody's talking about the game. Everyone wants to watch that game. Obviously, it's a weather thing, too. I mean, we talk about weather as we get here. This is the time of year where weather really matters. We've seen that where, you're going to get some snow there. The Sunday night game, there's talk of it being 3 degrees at kickoff. Like, granted, I don't think if it's like not raining or not sleeting or not snowing, whatever it may be in Green Bay, I think that'll be okay. Like, you could deal with cold weather. But, this is one of those weeks that were Sunday morning. You got to flip through the weather, make sure we don't have any snowy, windy games in terms of pass offenses.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up weather. Last week, I thought there was big edge on the afternoon slate when you saw the conditions in Seattle for that Bears game. I initially, at about noon, I was planning to have around 100% of DK Metcalf and some of the passing game. Then I saw, the snow and the conditions, and I went all the way to 0 DK Metcalf. So I was so tilted when he caught that 40-yard touchdown right away. That happened to be he only had one catch for one more yard after that, so still didn't do great. But if you caught that weather, it was a big edge to avoid the passing games and then load David Montgomery and even Rashad Penny, who had huge games in the snow. So we haven't been paying attention to weather for the most part up until this last week, but going forward, very important. Dome games look better, and cold, snowy games look worse for the passing game and sometimes can be good for the running game. Yeah,
that's a good point. And obviously wind is a big thing for me too. Like that's the one factor. Like if you're going to get those big gusts, teams just not willing to throw the ball more than somebody's quarterbacks look fine, but like the coaches just want to run the ball. They want to run the clock. And we just obviously don't want that from a fantasy perspective. But so let's talk about some guys we think are going to be popular. We talked about, with the big slate, popular does come down. I think the first name we have to talk about in terms of talking about who's going to be on a lot of teams is what to do this week with Trey Lance. He is 4,800 at quarterback. All indication is that he's going to start for the 49ers this week. As a 49er fan, I'm excited to watch. A little nervous. I really want him to be good. But it's certain we'll obviously know by Sunday what's going to happen for sure. But Jimmy Garoppolo has not practiced the last 3 days. I can't fathom they're going to use him after not practicing all week. He was terrible against Tennessee last week, cost them that game, in my opinion, had a couple of really bad picks, missed Kyle Juszczyk for a wide open touchdown. So a weird little, maybe changing of the guard moment. Obviously depends how Trey Lance looks. But 4,800 for a guy who runs the ball is really, really cheap when you get that rushing floor in there.
Yep. Trey Lance is too cheap for this spot. I think for cash games, he's basically a lock, I would say. I'm going to be playing him in cash for sure. It's a good matchup at home against Houston. He ran the ball 16 times in his last start for 89 yards. If he was 6,000, he'd probably still be a decent play and a decent cash option in this spot. But 4,800, it's just really cheap. And we might not have it's early, but we might not have the crazy cheap value that we've had recently. And rostering Lance at QB allows you to spend up for if Jonathan Taylor, Cooper Kupp, maybe an expensive tight end. I think Lance for cash games just makes a ton of sense. And then of course he's a good tournament play too. I'm not sure about, his passing upside. I think I probably prefer Kittle and Debo when Garoppolo's in there, but it's tough to say. We haven't seen much of Lance. I'm not sure how popular those guys will be in tournaments, so it might be okay. I can see people not wanting to spend for Debo and Kittle with Lance in there. So I think it's probably good for tournaments too. You can also play him naked in tournaments though.
Yeah.
You got to say that a $4,800 quarterback who runs. Yeah. So I'll play him in cash, and I'll probably have some exposure in tournaments too. It's a good price, and he's got a pretty clear path to 20 points, and that's really good for 4,800.
Yeah. I'm fascinated to see what they're going to do in terms of the offense. They were very limited with the offense when he played against Arizona the first time. But like you said, ran 16 times, but he was 15 to 29. I mean, he still threw the ball 30 times. They were down in that game. He was one, and there was no George Kittle in that game either. So like the offense, and Brandon Ayuk kind of wasn't fully out of the doghouse yet. Like their offense is way more full of weapons at the moment than it was when he first played. So it'll be interesting. I have to think that with the kind of a game plan in place, Shanahan will have some stuff built in for him. But it'll be fascinating. We'll see. We'll know kind of how much he apparently he's looked good in practice. Been like playing scout quarterback, and got player of the week a couple of those weeks, and really. But it'll be interesting to see how aggressive they are. I guess my only concern would be they are playing Houston. If they get up with some running early on, maybe they just hand the ball off 25 times in the second half. So there is a floor here, but it's with his rushing ability. It's hard not to do it at 4,800. But if you're in a tournament, you want to get away from Lance, you want to do something else. I would assume Josh Allen is the most popular. He's 8,000 though. He's really pricey, but he's rolling right now. 3 touchdowns in each of his last 3 games. They're playing Atlanta. They're at home. With another weather check to see how it'll be in Buffalo on game day, but a really good matchup. Atlanta just cannot get after the quarterback. They're last in the NFL in pressure rate. They're last in sacks. They're 30th in passing points per yard. Like it's a mess of a defense there. We talked about a couple weeks ago. We talked about even Garoppolo without the rush would be a play there. Game script is a problem here. They're big favorites against Atlanta. Maybe they hand the ball off, but when it comes to Josh Allen, he's kind of part of the running game too, and he's involved in everything they do there.
Yeah, I agree. I think Allen's the top spend up. Like you said, I think weather is important with that game being in Buffalo. So I'll look to that as sort of the decider whether I want to roster Allen in tournaments or not. Yeah, there's blowout risk. There is for a lot of these games. I'm not so much worried about that. Allen and the Bills can put up 5 touchdowns in the first half, and he can get there. I think there's some quarterbacks in the mid-range that look good too. This 6,800, 6,700, 6,600, this sort of high 6 range. You have Herbert, Dak, and Jalen Hurts. I think any of those make for good tournament plays. I don't know. I probably shouldn't have skipped from the very top. I don't know. Did you want to talk about Mahomes, Brady, those guys at all?
I think when we talk about passing stacks and stacking games, we'll definitely get into those quarterbacks. We'll talk about Mahomes and Brady and Joe Burrow. But I agree that high 6,800 range is interesting. I think there's enough guys in there when nobody will jump out and be super popular. I know people like Jalen Hurts with the rushing ability. He scares me a little bit just based on the fact that you got to get those rushing touchdowns. He only ran the ball twice last week, which is a little concerning, and you don't want to rely on the passing. But, they played Washington 2 weeks ago. He was really big in that game. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. He only had 38 yards rushing. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. So I think people will like going back to that matchup. Washington hasn't been able to stop any quarterbacks all year long. So the matchup is good there. But, I think there's a lot of plays in the middle. We'll talk about that. But I think Allen probably jumps out a little bit, and then obviously Trey jumps way off the page at 4,800.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should also mention Taysam Hill back, and he's 6,000.
I have no idea what to do with that one. I'm gonna be fully open on that one. I saw the price. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, I see the New Orleans offense. I'm like, yeah, less interesting. But he certainly runs so much that he can get there for pretty easily, pretty quickly. Yeah.
So if we didn't have Trey Lance on the slate, I think people would be talking a lot more about Taysam Hill.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I don't think he'll be too popular, but we know what kind of upside he has with that rushing. And then, similar to what I said about Lance, if we didn't have Lance, I think people would also be talking about Tyler Huntley. 5,600 is a pretty good price. Obviously, this is assuming Lamar is out, which he hasn't practiced as of yet. But
I watched that one clip of Lamar in practice the other day, and I don't think there's any way he's playing.
No, yeah, I don't either. And Huntley's shown to be a good fantasy quarterback. 13 rushes for 73 yards last time out. Actually, at least 40 yards rushing in all 3 of these starts. And 5,600 is a good price tag. So I think you can consider Huntley as well in that lower range.
When we talk about games to stack outside of the big two, Tyler Huntley might come up in my conversation. I'm just going to tease that right now. What about running back? There's a lot of mid-range running backs I want to talk about. I think we'll talk about them when we talk about mid-range. But Jonathan Taylor is 9,000 against the Raiders. Pretty good matchup there. We have the risk of Carson Wentz is kind of up in the air at the moment with the COVID stuff. We don't know if he's going to make it back in time. How interested are you in Taylor? The offensive line is finally they were missing 3 guys last week. They are back now, including Quentin Nelson, who's on the COVID list. Do you need Wentz to play Taylor at the price? Where do you feel about this at 9,000?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that. I'm not sure if I like Taylor better with or without Wentz. I mean,
Okay.
If Wentz isn't in there, they're still going to be favorites in this game against the Raiders. And they might have to lean on Taylor more. I don't know. Maybe, it's tough to say that. He's getting, 25, 30 carries a game.
Right.
It's a little concerning that he hasn't been involved in the passing game recently. He actually has 0 catches in the last 3 weeks, only 2 targets. So yeah, I mean, of course I like Taylor. I don't know if I'd rather have him with Wentz or without Wentz. Where do you fall on that?
I think I'd rather have him with Wentz. It's not like Wentz is a guy that's going to drop back and throw it 40 times anyway, but I just like the threat of that. I assume that if Sam Ehlinger plays, the Raiders will stack the box. I mean, you might as well dare him to throw if you can. I don't know. I mean, with Taylor, he can still bust one. Last week was weird. Like, their offensive line was pretty decimated. He had 108 yards, but he had like a 45-yard carry early in the game, and it was kind of just average and didn't do much after that. It was like whatever that was, 26 for 40 or for 60-something the rest of the carries. But their offensive line is back. The Raiders played the Denver running backs really well last week. Javonte Williams was like 7 for 12. The Raiders have only had 200-yard rushers all year, so this matchup doesn't scare me, but the Raiders haven't been thrashed on the ground either. It's tough. He's 9,000. He's really expensive, but has just been a beast all year long. Last week was the first time in 11 games he hadn't scored a touchdown. I think I'd rather have Wentz play though. I think I'd rather have at least that threat of kind of a veteran quarterback in there. I think that's I think to play 9,000, I probably need Carson to play.
Yeah, I think I agree with you because with Wentz in there, you figure they're going to be inside the 20 a lot more often. So you got to figure Taylor's touchdown equity is considerably higher with Wentz in there and, a better offense.
Yeah, I agree there. We're going to talk mid-range running backs in a little bit. I think there's a whole bunch of guys in like kind of that 5,000 to 7,000 range that are playable. There's also a lot of guys between 7,000 and 9,000 at Taylor that are probably going to be low percentage this week. It's just tough to get them in, but we'll talk about those also. But I want to hit popular receivers real quick. I think there's 2 guys in the 6,000s that really jumped out as like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to be carrying those. It's Antonio Brown at 6,100. It's Jalen Waddle at 6,700. Did those jump off the page to you as much as they did to me?
Yeah, absolutely. Both those guys. Antonio Brown still mispriced without Chris Godwin. He should be 7,000 for sure without Godwin for any matchup. Not to mention a matchup against the Jets. I think
15 targets last week is just massive.
15 targets last week. Yeah, 10 catches. Spot against the Jets and just too cheap. So Brown, yep. Brown's a lock for cash games again. Not a must for tournaments, but obviously a good play. And then Waddle, yeah. I like Waddle in cash games too. Those targets, 12, 11, 10. Just the way they use him, you feel safe. You feel safe with Waddle that he's going to get his catches. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think those are the popular players in the 6K range.
Waddle's just so involved right now. You mentioned the targets, but last 7 games, it goes a ways back. He has 9+ targets in 6 of those 7. He has 8+ catches in 5 of those 7. Like, that's PPR gold. You start at 8 points before you even get off the bus. Like that's just huge in PPR. He has 90+ yards the last 3 games, so now he's combining the catches with actually doing something with them. Not only that, Tennessee, who they're playing, is last in the NFL in catches, yards, and points per game to slot wide receivers. Like, the matchup works, the play that works, the player works, the way they're playing right now works, the way he's kind of syncing with Tua works. I was surprised he was 6,700, probably because he played a Monday Night Football last week. He didn't get the bump up after the 92 yards and a touchdown. I think that he jumps out too. And you mentioned Brown. I mean, just the Jets are they're a mess. They're 31st in targets, yards per target to wide receivers. You mentioned no Godwin, no Mike Evans. Also, it looks like it's pretty much him and Gronk. I just think I think Brown and Waddle jumped way off to me. I was a little surprised on both of their prices.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just looking at Evans quickly. I think we're going to have Evans back.
Oh, you do? All right. Last I read, it was looking pretty questionable on him, but that's good at least.
I just see, the note here says he was running routes and he was catching passes, and
those are both good things for a wide receiver.
Yeah, he appears to be activated from the reserve COVID list.
Nice. Right.
It's not official yet, but yeah. So if Evans didn't play, yeah, that's another big bump to Brown. If Evans does play, you can definitely get off Brown for tournaments. But as of now, yeah, my cash lineup had Cooper Kupp, Waddle, and Brown in there. I think it's pretty straightforward, and you'll have the salary for that if you want to do it.
Yeah, so, I mean, we obviously mentioned Trey Lance. Just 4,800 quarterback opens up so much you can do everywhere else. So let's talk about some tournament stuff, some stacks here. But first, a note from our sponsors at WynnBET. There's one thing we appreciate here at Rotowire, is making good decisions, and even more so making the right decision. Listen up, I have an incredible offer for you with Rotowire's newest partner, WynnBET, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more, all your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino, take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 6 states: Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia, all while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all Rotowire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 all on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for Rotowire's fantasy podcasts. So, Ryan, this is one of those weeks. We talked about the over-unders on those 2 games, the Arizona game, the Arizona-Dallas game, the Kansas City-Cincinnati game, over 50. Nobody else over 47. Before we get into some individual stacks, I kind of wanted to talk about some games maybe off the radar. These games that aren't the 47 and below games you think might go over the Vegas total that you're interested in stacking. What games jump off the page for you if you could pick one or two? I have a couple here myself too, but what are you looking at? What kind of games are you looking to attack and stack to get it kind of away from those top 2 games?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if any jump off the page.
Okay.
It's tough. It's tough after those 2 games with the totals above 50. The one I was looking at that I think is interesting is Tampa Bay and the Jets. First, just like a little bit of narrative with Brady. He had been sort of the clear MVP favorite up until last week, and now he's been passed by Rodgers. I think Brady wants that award. You can see him, it's a matchup against the Jets. So a few stats, the Bucks have the number 1 rated offensive line and the number 1 rated defensive line, and the Jets are bottom 5 in both of those categories. So it's a great spot for the Bucks. I can see, I would play this game in hopes of like a 35-14 score. Some people are, afraid of the blowouts when it comes to stacks, but a lot of the best teams on this slate have double-digit spreads, so you might have to attack some, and I don't mind attacking this one. I could see Brady throwing for 4 or 5 touchdowns. We talked about Antonio Brown being just a great play, so you can obviously pair him with Brown. I don't think anyone will play Mike Evans. I think he's going to come off the COVID list, 7K, multiple touchdown upside in this spot. And if you're worried about, maybe Brown being too popular, you could get some easy leverage pairing Brady, Brown with Ronald Jones even. People have been worried about Ronald Jones maybe not catching passes, but any running back that plays with Brady is going to catch passes. Jones had 3 targets last week. He caught a touchdown from Brady last year in the playoffs. He just looks like a pretty good play on his own. So, I don't mind maybe pairing Brady with Jones and Brown, or Brady with Brown and Evans. Of course, you can use Gronk in this spot too. I probably won't use Gronk. These blowout matchups, I don't necessarily think are the spots for Gronk when they might want to rest him a little bit for the playoff run, and they have some other tight ends too. But then as far as the Jets side, they don't really need to do much for you to run it back with a guy like Braxton Berrios. Elijah Moore hasn't practiced and is still on the COVID list. It looks like he's going to be out. Jamison Crowder hasn't practiced yet. It looks like he's going to be out. So like Berrios for 3,700 allows you to afford all that. He had 6 targets last week, 10 the week before, 10 2 weeks before that. A few rushing attempts in there. So yeah, I think I like the idea of sort of a blowout stack with Tampa Bay and maybe running it back with Berrios. What about you? Give me another game besides those obvious two.
Yeah, I like yours, and I think that not only Berrios, I think that you could even do Michael Carter coming back too. He was really active last week. I think that if they get down, they'll probably dump it off to him a lot. So I do like that. And you're right on the 35-14 thing. Like, you don't need the Jets to score. It doesn't have to be 38-35 for a stack to work, which is, I think, really important. So I have two. One is cheating a little bit. It's like the third or fourth highest game, but I really like this Rams-Baltimore game to go over the 46.5 that the Vegas set as the total. And the thing I like about this game in terms of stacking and playing is you can do it from like 50 different directions. You can play both quarterbacks. I mean, Stafford was really bad last week. He's 7,100. He had 3 interceptions, but the Baltimore secondary is just getting smoked. We saw it with Joe Burrow last week. I mean, they are 31st in passing points per game allowed in fantasy. Baltimore blitzes a lot. Matthew Stafford just goes off against the blitz. He's really good against the blitz. So I just think Baltimore's just so decimated the secondary with so many injuries that I think this just works really well for a kid back and forth. And we talked about Tyler Huntley earlier. You mentioned him. Like, he had a really good game the last time he started. He was what did he do? He had 4 touchdowns in that game, 215 yards passing, two touchdown passing, and then 73 yards rushing. You have that rushing floor with 2 touchdowns there, only 5,600. You can play either quarterback. You could play the running back of the Rams. Sony Michel is playable. He's 5,800. He was 27 for $131, a touchdown last week. I mean, you look at the Rams, the last 4 games, they have 107 running back touches. He has 95 of them. So, like, he's the guy right now. Jarrell Henderson had 1 touch last week, and now I think he's hurt again. So Michel's playable. You've got a lot of Rams receivers that are playable. Obviously, Cooper Kupp, but he's 9,500. I do get that. But there's options here. If you want to play Kupp, then you don't play Mark Andrews in this game. You play someone cheaper. You play Marquis Brown, something like that. If you want to play Andrews, maybe you play Odell Beckham instead of Kupp. There's just so many different ways to go. There's so many different options here. I really like it. I mean, Beckham has scored 4 the last 5 weeks. Great matchup there. If you can't afford Andrews, you just play Tyler Higbee at 4,000. So another playable guy in this game. He has 5 catches each of the last 2 games, coming on a little bit as the season goes on here. Low yards, but he has 5 catches and a touchdown. Like, that really works at the price of 4,000. And I like Marquis Brown this week. I think that he's 5,900. It's been a weird year for Marquis Brown, a guy that we kind of think of like, oh, he just catches long passes and scores touchdowns. His targets have been huge. Last 5 weeks, 10, 7, 8, 13, and 9. But no games over 55 yards since week 9, which is crazy when you consider how skilled Brown is. Just their offense is built right now. They're throwing him short passes. But I'd like him to if you're going to give me those targets, I think he's going to have to break one at some point with the speed and talent he has. So I just think there's so many ways to go. And Mark Andrews is 7,400. He's a crazy stretch of games. You mentioned him earlier. He's a league. He was a tournament winner last week with when you paired him. Kind of ran him with Burrow and Higgins or Chase or even Tyler Boyd on the other side last week. But he's had 100 yards 3 straight weeks, 34 targets last 3 weeks. He's massive. The thing I like about this game is for the low total. I mean, 46.5 is not low, but not high. There's a lot of pieces to play here. I don't know. I have to piece them together perfectly, but I like the fact you can go expensive and cheap or cheap and expensive. You can play either quarterback. I really like this game. I think we get into the 50s on this game by the time it's over.
Yep, I really like that call. The Ravens matchup has been the winning stack the last 2 weeks, and the totals in those matchups were under 50 as well. So yeah, I think that game is a really good environment for fantasy points, and both teams have some elite fantasy players. Yeah, that's a good call.
You want a super sneaky in a tournament if you're playing multiple lineups, low total game that I think goes over also?
I'd love to hear it.
I really like, you're gonna laugh at me. I really like Detroit and Seattle to go over the 42.5 this week. I think there's a lot of weapons here, and the matchup is good. Like, neither defense is really good, which is what you want. And usually at a 42.5, you have struggling offenses and decent defenses. Here, I don't like either defense, really. I think Russell Wilson at 6,200 is actually playable this week. He's been very middling last 4 weeks. Like, we kind of think like Russell Wilson, he's been so bad because he's not been Russell Wilson, but he's been quarterback, I think 8-14 the last 4 weeks. So like, he's been decent. But you just kind of feel like a big week is coming. The Lions really struggle with downfield targets. So he's got Tyler Lockett is back from COVID. I know he lost 8 pounds on COVID, but he's back last week. Maybe he's fully healthy this week. Nice spot for him to hit some deep passes at 6,400. DK Metcalf, had the big touchdown you mentioned last week, 6,500. We're really going to go all year without a big DK Metcalf game. Like, we haven't had a giant blow-up DK Metcalf game. It has to come at some point. We only got 2 weeks left. I just like I like pairing Wilson with either one of those guys. I think you can even go Wilson with both of those guys. It might be a week where you can actually play both of them. But you also have Rashard Penny here. He's 6,100, 17 for 135 and a touchdown last week in Chicago. Good matchup here. He has killed both his favorable matchups. Chicago and Houston did really well. Had a down game in between, but the bad matchup games, he's smoked. He's looked good too. He looked good in the snow last week. Detroit is bottom 8 in rushing points per game, rushing yards, touchdowns to running backs. Like, they're just bad stopping the run. I think the key for me with a stack in this game is the other side is just super easy. I think you just play Amon-Ra St. Brown. You don't even think about it. You don't worry about anybody else. He has double-digit targets in 4 straight games. Like, he was 9 for 91 and touchdown this week with freaking Tim Boyle playing quarterback. Like, it's impressive right there. And you give me 4 straight weeks of a guy with double-digit targets. I'm going to take that every time. I think it's really easy. I don't think you have to figure out who you want to stack, who you want to play here. I think it just works. He's 6,000, a playable salary there. Touchdowns in 3 of 4, 70+ yards in 4 straight games. I'm actually going to bet this game to go over. I think 42.5 is too low. It's Seattle, Detroit. Like, I'm not going to go crazy here, but I think it's a pretty stackable game where you play the Seattle, Wilson and one of the receivers, or 2, and then you come back with St. Brown.
You completely sold me. Yeah.
When it's 3-3 at halftime, don't call me and ask me about it.
Yeah, I was looking for an excuse to play Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just crazy to see at least 11 targets in 4 straight games. Yeah, you said it. I guess if I have anything to add, I was also looking for an excuse to maybe take a chance on DeAndre Swift, who doesn't have an injury designation and has been practicing fully and is now down to 6,000. I don't think he'll be popular. So I wouldn't mind taking a chance on Swift either.
And if you want to look at game script and how you need a game to go to do well in tournament, like if Seattle gets up, DeAndre Swift, they're going to dump it off to him a bunch of times. Early in the year, he was getting a bunch of those plays in the second half where he would catch a bunch of passes. So I think that works too. And obviously a talented guy. So yeah, if you wanted to get a little different away from St. Brown, your Swift call is really interesting and good. I do like that in terms of a game flow, game script. If it works the way you need it to on the Seattle side, I think it works really well for Swift coming back too.
Definitely. Yeah, the first half of the year, he led the league in fourth quarter targets, and that included wide receivers.
That's pretty wild right there. And it seems like Jared Goff will be back. So that's, not that we're really excited about Jared Goff, but I think we'd rather have him in there for a stack game rather than Boyle.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So let's talk about some other stacks you want to play. Obviously, we talked about, we've got the KC Cincinnati game. We've got the Dallas Arizona game. What are you looking in terms of where you're going to play? If you have a tournament, you're not going Trey Lance in the lineup. Are you going Mahomes with one of the receivers? Are you playing Burrow with one of his guys? Are you playing Dak? Where are you kind of leaning as your favorite stack among these more popular games?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because obviously you can make a good argument for all 4 of those sides. I think the first place for me, is going to be Dak and Dallas. I like that Dak is 6,700. He's 1,000 cheaper than Mahomes, and just looked great last week against Washington. He had over 300 yards passing in the first half and made 3 or 4 touchdowns in the first half. Arizona hasn't looked that great recently. I think this could be a spot for Dallas to put up some points. I like, CeeDee Lamb always. I think 7,100 is, it's a decent price. It's a little cheaper than he's been recently. And people might be a little bit off of him. He hasn't scored a touchdown in 5, 6 weeks. Hasn't had a big game in a while, but he's always he's always in play for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think Gallup's a decent price. I think Dalton Schultz has been very involved recently, 8 catches in consecutive games and a touchdown. And, people still don't really like to roster Schultz. I mean, yeah, he'll be rostered because it's a good stacking spot, but not overly so. So I think I like the Dallas side, and I like some run back options on Arizona. I like Christian Kirk. I think it's a good salary for Kirk. I think he's going to see plenty of targets. It could be another spot for Chase Edmonds. We'll have to see about the injuries or the injury to Connor. I know they're both listed as questionable right now, but even if they both play, I still think Edmonds is perfectly fine. I mean, we saw him catch eight balls last week on 9 targets. He had a huge game against the Colts. So I think I lean that game only because the prices are better. Yeah. I do like KC and Cincy, but you got to pay $8,300 for Tyreek, $7,300 for Kelsey. Burrow and Higgins are the most expensive they've been all year. I still like that game, but it probably has me leaning Dallas. What about you?
So I was going to ask you before I get into that, how do you deal with someone with Burrow in terms of strategy? I mean, obviously he went crazy last week. Do you think everybody's like, oh, he can't do it again and don't play him, and then suddenly he's interesting? Or do you think everybody's like, oh, I'm just going to play Joe Burrow again because he won a bunch of tournaments last week?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. It's tough for me, I sort of lean that people aren't going to play him as much because it's such a big salary jump. And, Casey's D hasn't been a great spot to target recently. People just don't like paying the salaries when guys are at their highest point of the season. People didn't like playing T. Higgins before. I mean, do they like to play him now? I don't know. 6,900. So yeah, those spots, I sort of like those spots. Yeah, I like to take a chance on those spots when guys are, have a big salary bump like that. I guess I don't think people like to take chances there, which makes me want to take a chance there.
Yeah, fun game. I mean, Kansas City defense has been really good. I think they had 17 or fewer points in 7 of 8 games. They've been really good. But this is a pretty back and forth, high power game. And Tyreek Hill is tough. He only played 29 snaps last week. They got up in that game. They didn't really need him. They just kind of rested him coming off COVID. He was 2 for 19. If you played him in a lineup the way last week would, you pretty much died it. I mean, there was no way you could pay that price and him going 2 for 19 and do well with as high as scores were. But I mean, the week prior, before COVID, he was 12 for 148 and a touchdown. It was first 100-yard game since week 4, but he went crazy. Kelsey missed last week to COVID, so we'll see kind of how he comes back. But I think that's the riskier one for me, just because the prices are so high. I mean, Mahomes is 7,800. You mentioned Hill's 8,300, Kelsey 7,300. I think I like the Cincinnati side a little bit more in that game. I'd probably go Jamar Chase instead of Higgins, just kind of playing me. Maybe it's his turn thing, but I mean, Chase still had 152 yards, 125, 150 yards last week. So he was still 125. Sorry, he was still really good, but obviously Higgins got all the attention for the 194 and the 13 targets. But we talked about Brady. I think that he works with Brown or Evans or I would pray. I think I agree with you on Gronk, but Evans or Brown here. I lean Dallas also, and the key for me, you kind of hit it all with the Dallas game, and I agree with all everything you said. I think even if you don't stack this game, I really like CeeDee Lamb this week as a standalone. 7,100, I think we're going to see a big CeeDee Lamb week this week. I'm going to play him in a bunch of lineups, even in ones where I maybe play Trey Lance or stack somewhere else.
Yeah, I like that. I like using CeeDee, not necessarily in a Dallas stack, just as a one-off, to still get some exposure to arguably the best game on the slate.
I think he hasn't gone over 100 yards since week 8. I think that ends this week. I think that it just feels to me like we're going to get 100 yards and a touchdown and a Lamb and maybe a big blow-up game too. We mentioned all the stacks. So we kind of hit everybody in talking about quarterbacks. I know earlier you mentioned there were some mid-range quarterbacks. We talked about the upper 6,000s. Are there any other quarterbacks you want to mention that you're really thinking about playing pretty aggressively this week?
We
kind of already talked Hurts. We mentioned Herbert.
Not that I'm going to play aggressively. I was going to take another chance on our guy Herbert. But with Mike Williams back now and Keenan probably a bit overpriced, it's tough to sort of come up with an And, the Denver side of that game isn't great. So it's tough to come up with something I like in that game.
Yeah, good luck picking a Denver receiver on a week-to-week basis. It's just hard to figure. I think it's going to be Drew Lock again this week. It looks like Bridgewater's not going to play, and it's hard to – I mean, Sutton was a little bit better last week, but it's hard to pick one there.
Yeah, if anything, I don't mind like a small Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert stack with maybe coming back with someone on Washington. But yeah, I'm not like overly in love with this range. I prefer the guys at the top or the guys that we mentioned.
Yeah, I agree there. So what about running backs? We talked about Jonathan Taylor at the top. There is a slew of kind of in the mid range, or I guess the second tier range of running backs. We've got Austin Eckler's 8,200, Alvin Kamara's 7,900, Joe Mixon's 7,500. Mixon had a big game last week. If you're not playing Taylor at the top, are you dropping down lower? Or is there anybody in this range you would like? I guess you could put Zeke in there too at 7,100. Is there anybody in like the 7,000 and 9,000 range that you really are going to play a lot of this week?
Yeah. So I'm going to be off of Eckler just because I'm worried about his usage a bit. Just with the injuries that he's been dealing with, the fact that Justin Jackson's looked good and that Jackson was, seeing a decent amount of snaps and touches even when Eckler was playing. So probably no for Eckler. Those two guys below him, Kamara and Mixon, I think they're interesting. Kamara, he doesn't project the greatest, but that also has him, I'm seeing right now 3% projected rostership. I don't know if it'll be that low, but I have a little bit of interest in Kamara if nobody's going to play him.
By the way, I don't think anybody's going to play him. I think 3% is dead on.
Yeah. Now maybe I won't either. And maybe, sort of that's what everyone's thinking, but I think that puts him into the conversation. I mean, he's got the talent to be the highest scoring running back on any slate. Home matchup against Carolina is not the worst spot. So yeah, I don't mind Kamara. And then Mixon. Yeah. Everyone's looking at the passing attacks in that game.
Yep.
So I think I'll have some interest in Mixon. It was nice to see him catch 6 passes last week, which, when he's involved in the passing game, I can always get behind Mixon. What about you? You partial to any of these guys?
Yeah, just as we're talking here, Kirk Cousins just put on the COVID list, so he's not playing this week. That's obviously the Sunday night game, so that won't affect us. But someone in the chat asked us about Justin Jefferson. Like, if without Cousins, how much do you worry about someone like Jefferson? I think I still play him, and if I'm in my fantasy playoffs, I don't think I'm sitting Justin Jefferson. But it looks like I think Sean Mannion, their backup, is also out. It's probably Kellen Mond if I'm doing the Vikings depth chart right. Like, I think I still play Jefferson, but boy, that's a little bit scary. That's huge in the fantasy finals right there.
Yeah, that's huge. Definitely makes me worry. I haven't looked at that game yet, but I would assume Thielen's out. Yeah,
Thielen's out. Thielen's on the IR. Yeah, so he's definitely out.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit of a bump to Jefferson. I mean, regardless of who the quarterback is, now they're almost sure to be trailing in this game. So you still got to think Jefferson's going to see double-digit targets. Obviously I don't like him as much without Cousins, but still in a good spot with no Thielen and in a game that they're likely to be trailing.
Yeah, not in the slate, but just to answer the question, I would worry, but I'd play him is kind of what I'd come down to it on.
Same.
But, on the running back question, I agree with you. I think Mixon's the guy here that I do like, just because of how just kind of involved he is in everything they do. It's weird. Like, his big games are games where they really use in the passing game. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. I think this is a game where they're going to have to kind of use everybody. I mean, last week he was only 18 for 65 rushing, but 6 for 70 receiving and a touchdown there. He's only 3.3 yards per carry his last 4 games. So while they give him a lot of volume, he hasn't been super efficient with it. But I just think he's super involved. Kansas City's allowing 4.5 yards per carry on defense. They're also allowed a lot of stats out of the backfield to running backs catching the ball. So I think Mixon's my favorite too. The Kamara thing's interesting. You mentioned, you kind of hit it what I was going to mention. I don't think anybody's playing him off that weak game last week. Taysom Hill is back, but that helps their offense. I don't know how much that helps Kamara. Like, it's just not really. It's not really the dump off offense they get into because Hill runs so much. And then at the goal line, like, you get inside the 10, Hill's going to run it too. So, but I think I agree. I don't think anybody's going to play him. On the flip side, since we're in the expensive range, we talked about Cooper Kupp earlier. We're talking about Stafford and the Rams, and obviously Kupp. we don't need to go through his resume. Like, he's got a chance to set records this year. He's 9,500, but like every single week, he's really good. These other expensive receivers, they're one in the kind of that same range. We talked about 7,000, 9,000. Debo's 8,700, really expensive considering he's got Lance starting. Stephon Diggs, 7,900. Keenan Allen, 7,500. A.J. Brown off the huge game last week, 7,200. Is there anybody in the expensive receiver range here? I mentioned I love CeeDee Lamb at 7,100, guy that I'm going to be playing kind of alone or in stacks. Is there anybody else in this range that you really find yourself wanting to play this week?
If the weather's okay in Buffalo, I don't mind taking a chance on Diggs. And then, I'm a little too worried about Debo at that salary with Trey Lance. But I do like Tyreek Hill because of what you said earlier, in that he's had some bad games recently. Only 2 targets last week and 2 catches. So I think like his salary and the fact that he's like busted in 3 of his last 4 games, that sort of makes me want to play him. I mean, Tyreek always has 40 fantasy points in him. I mean, he's just crazy, crazy upside. I think I'll take a chance on Hill. I agree with you. I like CeeDee Lamb also.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point on Hill. I mean, the upside is so massive. I agree on Diggs. He was 7 for 85 last week on 13 targets. Like, he's still a ton of targets, but again, kind of in that vein we were talking about earlier with DK Metcalf. Like, we just haven't had that big blow up game. I think it has to come at some point. The only problem is that Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis are back this week, so suddenly that passing tree expands again. You got a lot of guys to touch the ball, but Diggs seems to always get his targets. I do like him. It obviously depends on the weather too, but I agree with you there. Debo's tough. Debo's 8,700, and I love Debo. Everybody knows from me in the pod. If you listen to it ever, I love Debo Samuel. You get the rushing yards. I just don't know what the game plan is going to be with Trey Lance. I don't think they're going to throw the ball a ton. If they get up, I think they will hand the ball off a lot in the second half. They may beat a Debo, but you're kind of banking on a rushing touchdown. Great matchup, but I worry that the targets and everything may not be there with Lance. Maybe they open it up with him. I don't know, but I'm not willing to pay 8,700 for it this week.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I won't have any Debo this week, even though I like him almost as much as you do.
Yeah. Almost, not quite. Before I get into the mid-range, what I think is interesting this week, a note from our sponsor, Yahoo DFS. The NFL season is heating up, and Yahoo is going big on daily fantasy football this season. There'll be a ton of big prize contests throughout the year on Yahoo, including the multi-entry contest now being shark-free. To celebrate Yahoo going big on DFS as well as Yahoo Daily Fantasy becoming shark-free, Yahoo's giving all users the opportunity to claim a free $10 in site credit. Users can take advantage of this free $10 site credit offer to join any paid contest, including Yahoo's biggest contest, the weekly $1 million DFS NFL Baller Contest. The weekly $1 million contest features $1 million in total prizes, including first place receiving $100,000 and a ton of overlay and prizes. Play daily fantasy football on Yahoo this season. Visit sports.yahoo.com/dailyfantasy/welcome to claim the free $10 offer to get started. So we've talked about expensive guys. We talked about stacks. We've talked about a lot of stuff, but I want to get into the mid-range a little bit here. I think it's an interesting range to speak, especially at running back. We've got in the 6,000s, we've got a bunch of guys kind of priced together here. We have Damian Harris, $6,600 off the 3-touchdown game. We have David Montgomery, who gets all the touches for the Bears at 6,500. We have Javonte Williams off a poor game again at 6,400, but plays the Chargers, who have been a team you want to run against all year long. And you got Ronald Jones, you mentioned earlier in the Tampa Bay stack, at 6,300. Among those 4 guys, there's somebody that I want before we get to the 5,000s. There's somebody in the 6,000s that you really are going to play heavily this week.
Yeah, I think first would be David Montgomery. The volume has just been great with Montgomery. 28 touches last week. His targets too. He's averaging almost 8 targets a game in his last 4, 9, 6, 7, 9. That matchup against the Giants, it might have a 37 total, but the Bears total is 21.5, I believe, right now, which is okay for Chicago and, a likely positive game script for the Bears. Montgomery is, sort of popping in the projections more than those other guys. So he's definitely in my cash lineup. And I don't mind him for tournaments either. Ronald Jones too. We've talked all year about the Jets being a great spot for running backs. And that's no different for Jones in Tampa Bay. So I think, Montgomery and Jones in that range. I love the Patriots running game in this spot at home against Jacksonville, but we have Ramondre Stevenson back. So it's tough to sort of decide which one. I think Harris is a really good tournament play. But for cash games, I'm looking at Montgomery and Jones.
Yeah, I like Javonte Williams as a tournament play also. Just I think that people will be off of him with, the fact that they split carries and all that, and they've kind of done all year long. But, I mean, it's just this Chargers defense. I mean, they kind of been better against running backs for a while, and then last week Rex Burkhead goes 22 for over like $135 where it wasn't 2 touchdowns. He was in a lot of tournament lineups with Burrow and Justin Jackson. Really quiet last week. He was 7 for 12, did score. I think he's just a tournament guy, but I mean, the upside is definitely there for him to go pretty crazy against the Chargers if he can kind of bust a couple of runs. Other than that, I agree with you. I mean, Montgomery's just getting so many touches, not super efficient, but if you're going to get that many targets, it's like hard not to be decent at 6,500 when you catch the ball so many times in a PPR format.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going up against Glennon and Fromm, figures to have the Bears in some decent spots, some decent field position, adds to Montgomery's touchdown equity a little bit. That combined with the volume makes him look pretty good. I like the Williams call for tournaments. I've been seeing a lot of things about how bad the Chargers are tackling, especially recently. So that bodes well for the running backs.
Yeah, Jeff Feinberg, who does a lot of stuff with Pat Mayo and as a big Chargers fan, has been ranting about their tackling all year long. He's like a Chargers nut, so it's a good one. He's been ranting about the tackling all year long.
Yep.
The 5,000 range I think is really interesting this week. We don't have quite the jump out obvious super cheap plays we had last week with Justin Jackson, et cetera, and we had Ronald Jones really cheap. I think Madison was really cheap on FanDuel at least last week. But we have 3 guys in the 5,000s here on DraftKings that I think are very playable. We've got Darrell Williams at 5,800 in that game. We talked about Kansas City and Cincinnati a bunch earlier, but 5,800, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is out. Chase Edmonds at 5,700. I mean, obviously James Conner's status affects that a good amount, especially with touchdown equity. And then Devin Singletary, my favorite guy in this range, 5,400. Great matchup against Atlanta. There's been 58 Buffalo touches last week. I know they don't hand the ball off a ton, but he has 50 of them. He's clearly taken over the lead back role here. He's a guy that gets a lot of targets too. Obviously, I don't think they're gonna be down against Atlanta, but he's explosive too. There's upside with Singletary. If he gets all the touches, I love getting a running back in this offense if he's going to be the guy.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I also prefer Singletary there. Breida was a healthy scratch last week. Zach Moss, a healthy scratch the week before. It seems like Singletary's sort of turning into the guy. It's a great spot at home to Atlanta. He catches passes too. So yeah, I think Singletary probably my favorite there, but I like Williams and Edmonds too. I think they're similar. You're rostering those guys for the catches, especially if James Conner doesn't play or plays. If James Conner doesn't play, then I might favor Edmonds. He'd get a lot more carries, obviously, and he's going to be involved in the passing game too. Darrell Williams, I like him to catch balls in this spot. I'm a little concerned. I think they're likely to use who is it? Derek Gore. So I'm not in love with Williams rushing upside, I guess, but I think he can catch a lot of passes in this spot. 7 or 8 catches seems pretty realistic for Williams. But yeah, I'm with you. I think I lean Singletary.
Yeah, I mean, Williams is just really a volume thing. He had 5. I think he had 5 starts without Helaire, and he had 19 touches in 4 of those 5 games. That's a lot of touches in that offense in this game. Both Williams and Edmonds are cheaper pieces of the higher scoring game. So I think that you've got to at least consider them. But you're right on the Williams rushing upside. He was under 4.0 yards per carry in each of those 5 starts. So he didn't do a lot with him at least rushing, but they use him at the goal line, they use him in the pass game. I just think if you're going to touch the ball this many times in this offense in that game, it's hard for him not to get there. If he's going to get 19 touches, if you told me that right now, I'd sign up 5,800 for sure and kind of hope I get a touchdown or 2 out of it. But I think Edmonds, I think if Conner doesn't play, you're right. He kind of goes to the top of the list. He had 9 targets last week. And I think that is a situation where with no DeAndre Hopkins, we're seeing the targets go to running back and Zach Ertz. It's the drop back. And usually it used to be D-Hop was a security blanket. Now it's, Ertz or one of the running backs. So I think that you get that many targets in a game in Edmonds. Obviously has some explosivity too. I mean, he can score. The pass use is just huge in the PPR. In this game, a back and forth game a little bit, I think Edmonds is very playable too. I mean, that's 3 guys in the 5,000 are super playable. I mean, that makes lineups open up a lot.
Absolutely.
Is there anybody under 5,000 you like? I kind of looked at Boston Scott for a second based on the fact that Miles Sanders is out, but I'm like, last week he scored, but he was 12 for 41. Like, I need more touches than that. And I think, Kenneth Gainwell's going to play. Jordan Howard's up in the air whether he's going to play. It was hard for me to get excited about an Eagles running back, but there wasn't a lot under 5,000. Like but there was the 5,000 guys I really liked enough that I didn't even jump down the 4,000s.
Yeah, we're on the same page. I looked at Boston Scott too, and Jordan Howard would have to miss for me to have interest in Scott. Like you mentioned, I don't think he'd be involved much in the passing game. I think that'll probably go to Gainwell. But if Howard is out, I think there's enough touches there for Scott in, a pretty favorable matchup that makes him okay. But if Howard plays, Gainwell's in there on third down, I'll probably be off Boston Scott, especially, he'll be not popular, but he'll be played. Not for me unless Howard's out.
I think I would just find the 500 to go Singletary pretty easily and go there. But I want to talk about some wide receivers in the mid-range, but a note from our sponsors at Thrive. Thrive is back for another season of fantasy football, and they're running huge guaranteed contests each week this NFL season. With Thrive Fantasy, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Sign up today and get a free 6-month Rotowire subscription. Here's how you claim that subscription. Number 1, visit rotowire.com/thrive. Second, deposit a minimum of $10, and you'll receive a 100% deposit bonus up to $100. And third, play in your first paid contest on Thrive. You receive a free 6-month Rotowire subscription. So Ryan, mid-range wide receiver, talk 5,000 to 7,000 somewhere in there. There's a couple guys in here I really like. There's 2 especially. The first one you've already mentioned was Christian Kirk. He's 5,800. Just like how they're using him in this offense without Hopkins. He has 21 targets the last 2 weeks. It's a game where I think Dallas is going to score, so Arizona's going to have to throw and come from behind. I just like getting those targets and a guy that is talented under 6,000. The other guy I love here we haven't talked about yet is Brandon Cooks at 6,000 against the 49ers. Great game script, great matchup. The 49ers cannot stop wide receivers. I've said it all year long. I don't know why coaches haven't been a little bit better about it, but I mean, look at last week, A.J. Brown, first game back off the injury, just smoked the Niners. They just didn't have anybody to guard him. They're just throwing the ball outside and deep, and just it's unstoppable because they just don't have cornerbacks right now that can stop good receivers. They have good safeties, they have good linebackers, they have good line. The cornerbacks on the outside are really, really rough. Cooks missed week 16 with COVID. He's back now. But week 15, he was 7 for 102, 2 touchdowns and 10 targets. He has been very, very good with Davis Mills. We talked earlier in the year, we need Tyrod Taylor for Cooks. That's not been the case. 4 or 5 games with Mills have been really good. And again, the Niners can't cover wide receivers.
Man, yeah. How good is Davis Mills? I mean,
he's the best rookie quarterback, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even really joking anymore. I'm really impressed with Davis Mills, and he's a big upgrade. It looks like from Tyrod Taylor, especially as far as Brandon Cooks is concerned. So yeah, Cooks would have been the first guy I mentioned. Also, definitely in on Brandon Cooks. Like you mentioned, it's a pretty good matchup even against the Niners, who have given up some big plays in the passing game almost every week, and
the cornerbacks are horrible.
Yeah, and Houston's likely to be trailing, which is good too. So yeah, definitely like Cooks. I like Kirk. We mentioned Amon-Ra already when you talked about the Seattle stack. Like him too. The other guy. So I wasn't I'm sort of up in the air on this guy still, and it's because of his quarterbacks. But DJ Moore, his salary has dropped now, and his targets are 12, 11, 10, 10. Again, don't love his quarterbacks, don't love the matchup necessarily, but I do like those targets for 5,600, and I do like the talent of DJ Moore. So I think that's a decent spot too.
We're back to Darnold this week, right?
Oh, okay. I like that. I like DJ Moore, or I like more with Darnold.
I think I do too. And I am looking at it now. I think it's going to be Darnold to start. I actually like Moore too. I'm a big Gigi Moore guy. I talked about him a lot last year, a lot earlier in the year. The quarterback situation has kind of pulled me away a little bit. But yeah, 5,600 is a low price for that talent. On the same note, 6,200 for the talent of Terry McLaurin, who's had some quarterback issues. The targets are down a little bit. I don't know what to do with McLaurin. His targets last 4 weeks are 5, 4, 4, and 6. Like that's not what you want. He hasn't topped 51 yards since week 11. Obviously the upside is there. I'm having a hard time getting him at 6,200 though, even with the price drop.
Yeah, and me too. And what makes it even harder to get to him is that Antonio Brown, Brandon Cooks, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're all the same salary. So the argument for rostering McLaurin is that pretty much everybody's going to feel that way. And pretty much everybody's going to roster those guys we just mentioned. McLaurin will not be popular. We know he has upside, and that makes him a good tournament play, theoretically at least from a game theory perspective. So I don't mind him, especially in like the largest field tournaments. I probably wouldn't use him in a single entry. But yeah.
If anyone ever tells you the NFL season isn't very long, just tell them that we, in week 17, we're debating Terry McLaurin versus Amon-Ra St. Brown and leaning towards Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it's been a long 17 weeks, but it's amazing how much stuff changes. I think Russell Gage in here is playable at 5,600. Like they're going to have to throw the ball a lot against Buffalo. You need some weather there, but he was down last week, but Matt Ryan only threw the ball 24 times. So it was just kind of a weird game there. So I think that's playable. If you want to go back to Tyler Boyd, 5,400, I think he's a little too reliant on the huge plays right now. Like he had a couple big plays last couple weeks, and he's 85 yards in 3 of 4, but like only 17 catches total. So I think I'd probably veer towards the other guys there. What about the cheap options, 4,500 and below? You mentioned Braxton Berrios already. We were talking about the Jets. He's 3,700. I think very playable with the 6 targets last week. I think I want to make sure Elijah Moore and Jamison Crowder sit. If I do it, I want him to be the slot guy there. But the Jets should have to throw a lot. Tampa's not an easy matchup, but if you're going to get a lot of throws, give me a bunch of 8-yard catches, and I can work with that at the price. Anybody else down here under 4,500 that you are interested in?
I haven't found one yet. No. I also, I haven't really looked too much yet. So I was hoping maybe you had. Berrios, though, yeah, I agree. I need Moore and Crowder to be out. I mean, if I'm going to roster a Jets receiver, got to make sure that Berrios is getting all the snaps and, his first or second option for whoever the quarterback is. I'm honestly not sure. Zach Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be Zach Wilson again.
Yeah. Zach Wilson.
Yeah. Did have that electric 52-yard rushing touchdown last week.
That was pretty cool. That was a nice play. Bad.
So we talked earlier about Kansas City and Cincinnati and all the points in that game. What do you do with someone like Barton Pringle in this game? He's 4,100. He had a big game last week. He was 6 for 75, 2 touchdowns on 7 targets. Obviously, it was helped by the fact that Kelsey didn't play and Tyreek Hill kind of played. Tyreek Hill played 29 snaps. But he's a cheap part of this game. He's kind of moved above Hardman in that wide receiver 2 situation and conversation for the Chiefs. He was under 50 yards the previous 5 games. So I'm not like talking like this guy's big, but 4,100 as a cheap piece of this game. I think if you want to slide that in there, I wouldn't argue too hard against it.
No, I wouldn't either. He's definitely moved ahead of Hardman. He seems to be like the clear-cut number 2 wide receiver for Kansas City. I do think Kelsey being out probably helped him quite a bit. Sure. I wish he was 3,100 like he has been all season. 4,100, yeah, I don't mind it, but he might be, he won't be popular, but he might be kind of too popular if people stack that game. I don't know. No, I should, people aren't going to play Pringle.
I don't know. I think some might off that game at 4,100. I think if you're going to go with a cheap piece of that game, he kind of sticks out as the one to play, I think.
Yeah. Okay. What I will say, actually, what makes him look a little better, at least as of now, there really aren't any cheap wide receivers this week.
I got 2 more for you coming. Don't worry.
Okay. Good. Last week we had, some guys that, Palmer, some quote unquote, sort of easy cheap plays where you just, they're going to get targets, they're going to play, guys that you feel sort of safe about. The week before that, we had Gabe Davis, 3,700. We feel safe about these guys with good quarterbacks on good teams in good spots. So yeah, give me these 2 guys that you're thinking of.
So I've got a team here that's 15.5 point underdogs this week. We lined up, should throw a lot, right?
Yep.
One of the receivers had 13 targets last week. He was 8 for 74. The other one has over 50 yards in 5 straight games, 4+ catches the last 5 games. He played 68 and 64 snaps last week. Now you're gonna laugh. They both play for the Jaguars, who we've talked about a bunch. We got Marvin Jones at 4,400. We have Laquan Treadwell at 4,000. Jones is the one that had 13 targets last week. Treadwell's been over 50 yards in 5 straight games. Just 15.5-point dogs. Like, this second half of this game should be gross and them just dropping back and throwing, 30 times. But they're Jaguars receivers. It's ugly. It's hard to figure. But I actually think both are – I wouldn't play them together, but I think both are very playable options at the prices. I'd probably lean towards Jones just because he's kind of the target guy. I mean, he had 13 targets last week, 8 for 74. He is not top 75 yards in a long time. I just think this is a game where they're going to throw the ball the whole second half. I think Jones is a better floor. I think Treadwell maybe has some more big play upside, but I think both are pretty playable. You've got to kind of hold your nose a little bit with Jacksonville, anybody. But I think both are pretty playable. With James Robinson out now too, I think that makes it so we get more balls, maybe more balls to Jones, short stuff. Like, you can't dump it off to James Robinson. You can't. They've got Ogunbowale, who I always mess up how to say his name, but he's starting at running back now. I think they lean on both these guys. I think both are playable. Obviously risky as they're kind of tournament guys, but I think both are pretty usable.
Yeah. I've been agreeing with you a lot so far on this podcast, and I'm going to agree with you again, actually. Yeah. Everything you said.
You love your Jags receivers. I know it.
You know it. I just didn't want to be the first to bring it up. But
it's always embarrassing to do it.
Those are good price tags, good projected game script. Yeah. Everything you said. James Robinson out. Yeah, I have no problem playing either guy.
Yeah, Treadwell's wild. I mean, 50+ yards in 5 straight games. Like, you haven't even felt it, but he's caught like that one big play every game.
Sorry.
No, the catches are there too. 4+ catches the last 5 games too. So, like, even a PPR, I mean, if you're going to go 4 for 50 at the price, like, that's a nice PPR floor built in. You just hope he scores, and it's a really, really good play all of a sudden. Yeah,
Treadwell, he got such a bad rap at Minnesota, but he's a first-round pick.
Yeah.
So
like 100 years ago, but still a first-round pick.
Right. First-round pick. Obviously a talented player, and he's looked good in Jacksonville. Good price tag. So I don't have a problem with either of those guys.
We've kind of hit most of the tight ends, and we've talked about stacks and quarterbacks and which games to stack and stuff. But so we talked about Andrews. We talked about George Kittle. He's expensive this week. He's 7,100. I don't think I pay the price this week with Lance starting. I just don't know how much they're gonna really throw. Kittle's obviously always playable. Had 3 straight big weeks, and then last week was quiet. It seems like their offense is like one of those 3 guys is like the guy left out each week. You can't figure out who it is, but if it seems like either Samuel or Kittle Ayuk, the way they build it, doesn't do a lot. But Gronkowski 6,200. I agree with you on the fact that I don't love him kind of blowout type games. I know he has a bunch of stuff in his contract. If he scores 3 more times, it's big money for him. Maybe they try and exploit that, but it's hard to play that. Kyle Pitts had 100 yards last week. Still only 1 touchdown in the year. That's probably the most amazing stat to me all year is that Kyle Pitts has 1 touchdown. My range I like is the low 5,000s this week. I like Zach Ertz at 5,200. I really like Dallas Goedert at 5,100. Quiet week last week. He had back-to-back 100-yard games. He was only 2 for 28 last week. But nice matchup. Washington defense has been kind of smoked with COVID. He had 100 yards against them, 135 against them last time. He had a touchdown called back last week. It would have looked a lot better. And then Dalton Schultz at 5,000. You mentioned earlier in the Dallas stack is playable too. I think my playing in tight ends is probably going to come from that low 5,000 range this week, I think.
Couldn't agree more. Yep. That low 5,000 range, those are my favorite guys too. Ertz, Goddard, Schultz. I don't know. Ertz and Schultz maybe look better because of the game stack, but I kind of prefer Goddard. So like if I just had to pick one, it'd be Goddard. Yeah, I agree with you.
What about any cheap tight ends you like? Say 4,500 and below? Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's any that I like, but considering for cash games, yeah. CJ Uzomah, he's all right. 7 targets last week, 6 and 6 before that. So I think that's okay, and since he should have to be passing. So I'm considering him. And then Cole Kmet's okay. He gets the targets and it's a pretty good matchup. So I think like those are the 2 cheap guys I'm looking at right now. As far as like below that, I don't know. You got anybody?
Since I've already mentioned, I think Seattle is going over their total and team total. I think Gerald Everett at 4,100 is fairly playable. It's hard not to maybe go up a little bit to those 5,000 guys, but if you find yourself kind of strapped for salary there, he had 60 plus yards the last 2 weeks. He was 4 for 68 a touchdown last week, 5 targets. They seem to like to use him inside the red zone there. He's been a top 12 tight end in 5 of 7 games with Russell Wilson back, so I think he's playable. I think weirdly enough, kind of harking back to a month ago, I think Foster Moreau is weirdly playable. He's only 3,800. He's at Indy, but over 65 yards the last 2 weeks. Like he was such a letdown that it kind of everybody's crossed him off. But 6'9" and 4 targets the last 3 weeks. He's playing a ton of snaps, and he kind of falls in there. A guy you mentioned last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, Brevin Jordan. He's 2,800. I think if you're going to go uber cheap and punt, I think he's the way to go with the thought that Houston's going to pass the ball a lot in the second half. I like receivers more than tight ends against the 49ers, but if you're going to give me some targets and throwing the ball a ton in the second half, Davis Mills has shown himself to be pretty decent. 2,800 for Jordan, I think, is a playable price if you wanted to punt the position.
Yeah, and I do sort of like Foster Moreau. I did mean to mention him. I agree with everything you said about him there.
So what about defense? We've gone a while here. We haven't mentioned defense, kind of the last thing. I'll let you go first. I found one defense in the 2000s I liked, but it was hard to find them. Seems like a lot of them are in the low to mid 3000s. But what are you thinking about doing on defense this week? There's a lot of big spreads this week and a lot of good teams against bad team matchups that you could probably exploit. Obviously, the Patriots against Jacksonville, the Bills against Atlanta. But what do you find yourself doing on defense this week?
Yeah. So the 2000 range, is tough. I normally try to pay down if I can. There's not much that jumps out there. I think my favorite one would be the Dolphins.
Damn it, you stole mine.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of sacks, right? 8 sacks, 6 sacks, up against, Tannehill and the Titans. You obviously still don't have Derrick Henry. So, yeah, it's a decent spot for sacks and turnovers. I think I like the Dolphins in the 2K range. If I'm going higher, the Bears against Glennon and Fromm, sure. The Chargers against, Chargers D has been bad, but Drew Lock throws picks.
Is also bad, yes.
Right. And then, the Saints seem to be in a decent spot. Darnold's been known to throw pick sixes probably as much as any other quarterbacks. So, I don't know. But what about you? Who's standing out for you?
Well, you stole my Miami one. I thought that was going to be a little sneaky, but apparently not at 2,800. They have, like you mentioned, they have 14 sacks the last 2 weeks. But on the flip side, with the Tennessee offense, here's the Tennessee sacks allowed the last 3 weeks: 4, 4, and 4. Like they've allowed 12 sacks the last 3 weeks. They're giving up a lot. Not only that, they have 4+ turnovers in 3 of the last 5 games. Like that's a lot of turnovers. 4 turnovers in a game is a ton. Like coaches freak out about that. To do it 3 of the last 5 games is pretty significant. Tennessee's really loose with the ball right now. Tannehill gives teams a chance to make a big play. I really like the Miami D at 2,800. I think that's probably my most playable one. And then the other 2 I like in the low 3,000s, you mentioned the Bears against the Glenn and Fromm. It's kind of funny how that's become a one name, put them together thing. God, the situation there is terrible. 5 interceptions for those guys the last 2 weeks. The Bears have 9 sacks last week. So I think that's going to be a popular one and one that you probably have a pretty good floor in that game. The other one I like is weirdly in a high-scoring game, but I really like the Dallas defense at 3,200. They had 5 sacks last week. I think that if they get up, maybe force Kyler into some mistakes. They forced 14 turnovers last 4 weeks. Like this is a defense that's they're forcing fumbles. They're intercepting the ball. Obviously, everybody's talked about Trayvon Diggs and all his picks, but Micah Parsons has been an absolute beast. With the sacks. I think they're the first team to have a guy with 10+ sacks and 10+ interceptions in the same season. Like they're just a fun defense right now. They're flying around. DeMarcus Lawrence had a touchdown last week, an interception. They're just playing really well right now. And I think that if they get in a lead, they may force Kyler to some mistakes. I think that in a game with a 51 total, I don't think a lot of people are playing the defense too. So I think you get them at a very low rostership too. But so I'm going Miami. I'm going Dallas. I'm going the Bears. And I think I'll probably, if I could get up to Buffalo, I love them this week against home against Atlanta. But I'll probably pay down Chicago, Dallas, and Miami be my 3 defenses on most of my teams.
Yeah, Dallas. Wow, they really have some playmakers on that defense. My friend is a huge Cowboys fan. He made bets weeks, months ago. Micah Parsons, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Diggs, Defensive Player of the Year, at great odds that have a chance to hit right now. Yeah, that play by Lawrence last week. Wow. Yeah, I like Dallas D. They can score touchdowns lots of ways.
The book might as well pay that Micah Parsons bet now, right? Like there's no way anybody passes him for that award, right?
Right, and it's funny. He was so disappointed when they drafted him. 11th, 13th, or whatever it was, over playmakers or other positions that they needed. But wow, what a pick that was!
Yeah, he's a stud. I think that. I mean, he's in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year overall. Like, I don't think he'll win that. There's some defensive linemen like Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa. There's some guys who are going to win that award, but Parsons is right there for the overall Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, the rookie thing has got to be a slam dunk.
Yep,
that's good betting by your buddy right there. That's well done.
Yeah, it helped to be a Cowboys fan in that scenario.
Yeah, nothing like being a homer and actually winning some bets for it, right?
Right.
But anybody else you want to talk about? I feel like we've kind of hit it all. We talked about sneaky stacks. We talked about chalk stacks. We talked about mid-range. We talked about expensive guys. We've kind of hit the gamut this week. It's a big slate. I figured we'd go a little longer than normal. Last question in the chat from the guy who had the Justin Jefferson issue. Would you start Keenan Allen over Justin Jefferson this week?
Oh, man.
My God, by the way, your team is good if that's your decision. Like, geez. That's a stacked roster.
Oh man, I don't know, Scott. I think I start for you.
I'm not sitting Justin Jefferson in my fantasy playoffs. Is what it comes down to. If I lose, I lose. But if I lose because I sat my number 2 pick stud, awesome guy who's been great all year, I just couldn't live with myself, and I think I sleep better at night knowing win or lose. I started Justin Jefferson. I wouldn't be able to sleep the other way.
Yeah, I think if Thielen was playing, I could get behind Allen, considering Vikings have, their third string quarterback. But as it is, Jefferson's still going to see all the targets. You got to sort of roll with what got you there,
Yeah. You didn't prepare a full scouting report on Kellen Mond coming to the podcast?
No, I didn't.
Luckily, that's a Sunday night game, so as much as we had breaking news, we didn't really have to deal with it too much, aside from a few questions. But it's just, and again, it's one of those things. If you want to hit us up on Twitter, I'm sure there'll be some late breaking news. There'll be running back, some cheap running backs may emerge if we get some other COVID list guys, some other injuries. So definitely hit us up. There's no Saturday games this week, so it's all the Sunday 14 game slate. We focus on that pretty good. Ryan's at it's not on the screen, but RyanBelongia. I spelled that right? Yes, I did.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm Scott at Scott Jenstad, Jenstad. Other than that, we got an extra week this week, so I guess we'll be chatting. Regular season next week, and then we're actually going to do. As long as you agree and are willing to talk to me, we're going to do the first 2 weeks of the playoffs. I think we're going to do the wild card round, which is now an extra game in there because there's only one team in the bye, and then we'll do the divisional round too. So as long as we have, I think it's 7 games that division at the wild card weekend, and then 4 games of the division round. DFS is still pretty big in those weeks, so we'll do shows in there. So we'll do next week for week 18, which is always a strange, crazy week with guys sitting. We'll do the 2 playoff weeks as long as Ryan's willing to hang with me across the water here.
Absolutely. I'll be there.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday DFS version. We greatly appreciate that. If you have any questions or anything, hit us up on Twitter. If you could please rate review the podcast, that'd be great. Also, other than that, hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks to WinBet for their sponsorship all year long. Other than that, hope everybody has a really good week 17. Hope you win some money and take care. We'll be back at you next week. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Good luck, everybody.